Hello everyone, this coming video I've been given permission to mirror by Dr. J.W. Morrison, theologist since 1994. Do have a look in at his channel, no matter if you believe or don't believe or think one thing or the other. Interesting stuff he comes up with, and he says it in a very down-to-earth, real-life way. I'm always tagging along now, going, what's that? What's that? I don't get that bit. So I'm like the slow person. There's always one in class, wasn't there? And that was me. So Pro One Theologist, have a look in. Let me just show you lots of things, JW stuff there. And he refers to the Bible for it. How fool do you? That was all that. Got the child thing, which I'm just about to show you. Just to show you what sort of subjects that you've got there to have a look. That was pretty shocking with that picture. That was about his own son. Very interesting, that. But shocking, but it had a happy ending. Here we go. As you can see, more navigating religion. So, hey, worldwide puzzled over apostate doctrine. Genocide, blood policy, facts and figures. It could be you. So, some important things there. So, the beginning of this video particularly, it had some older news reports from Australia that I had not come across before. So I thought you would benefit from seeing them, and he gives permission for people to share his videos. So off you go. Thanks for your time.
Robert Souter was sent to jail for a minimum of 3 years by Judge John Goldring, who had this to say about the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society.
The church authorities took it upon themselves to act as if they were the civil authorities, which they had no right to do. This matter was not reported to the police, as it should have been, and I'm surprised that the police have not taken any action against the church authorities. I hope they will do so. The state has the responsibility of protecting young people, and all citizens have a serious moral responsibility to assist it in doing so. I cannot criticize the church sufficiently seriously for not having reported this matter.
60,000 in Australia. They're the Jehovah's Witnesses, and some of you will find them on your doorstep today, devoutly preaching their message and pressing their literature. But this morning you're going to meet some other witnesses with a very different message. They're victims of child abuse at the hands of Jehovah's Witnesses, and they accuse the church of not only covering up their complaints, but actively frustrating police investigations. For years, a curtain of silence and obstruction has protected pedophiles within the ranks of the Jehovah's Witnesses. Now that curtain has been drawn aside by the victims and by former elders, whose testimony implicates yet another church in this growing scandal. Our cover story is reported by Graham Davis.
Over the past few years, the Catholic and Anglican churches have been forced to confront the presence of child abusers in the clergy and to stop blaming the abused for their own violation. Not so the Jehovah's Witnesses. They continue to shelter pedophiles and even protect them by imposing an impossible burden of proof on the children they molest. 3 years ago, Sunday exposed the extent of child abuse within the Jehovah's Witnesses, but the church is still ignoring the problem, still accusing the victims of being the real sinners. Sunday has now uncovered fresh evidence of incest by a church elder and found a convicted pedophile in another congregation who's again able to prey on young people. Graham Davis won an award for his 2002 exposure of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and he now continues his investigation.
Welcome back to 10 News. The Child Abuse Royal Commission has exposed what might be the worst cultural sexual abuse and cover-up within a church that we've ever seen. That church is the Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, there were claims today that 1,000 paedophiles were protected, evidence against them deliberately destroyed, and not even a single case ever referred to the police. Daniel Sutton has the story.
Their World Convention last year may have filled a Melbourne footy stadium, but Australia only has about 70,000 Jehovah's Witnesses. Still, when the Royal Commission came knocking, it discovered the church also has a staggering 1,006 files on alleged pedophiles within its flock. And what's worse,
not one was reported by the church to secular authorities.
The church's policy not to call police, but ask elders to investigate. One abuse survivor says that made her feel ashamed.
I found the experience of reporting my abuse to a room full of men, including the man who had abused me, very distressing.
Max Hawley was the elder in charge of her case. He took notes but destroyed them to protect church wives.
And would you do the same thing today if someone came and reported to you a serious allegation of sexual assault? Would you destroy any notes?
Yes, that's our practice.
To take action, the church demanded either a confession or the testimony of 2 witnesses, a policy that meant 125 complaints never proceeded. For engaging in child sexual abuse, members can be disfellowshipped from the church. But the inquiry heard today of the 400 or so alleged pedophiles kicked out of the Jehovah's Witnesses, more than half were subsequently allowed back in. The Royal Commission says church elders may have concealed serious offences and could now face charges themselves. Daniel Sutton, 10 Eyewitness News.
Now, the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse has turned its attention today to the current policies and procedures of Jehovah's Witnesses. Nicole Shettle has been at the inquiry. She joins us live now. Nicole, take us through what the inquiry has heard so far today.
Well, the Royal Commission is looking at how the Jehovah's Witnesses Church responded to its recommendations after a hearing which looked at the experiences of some survivors of sexual abuse back in 2015. And we heard that there are in fact 67,000 members of the church across more than 800 congregations in Australia. Now, its governing body is based in the United States, and because of that, the Commission has no powers to compel any of the big guns, so to speak, to come and give evidence. It did request that authorities from the US appear at these hearings either in person or via video link, but they declined. However, there were 2 senior church officials questioned today, and they're based in Australia, and they were asked about a number of issues, including changes to church laws, which now mean that victims are not required to confront their abuser, and also the church's refusal to abolish what's known as the 2-witness rule, which means that if a perpetrator doesn't confess to child abuse, then 2 eyewitnesses are required. And Terence O'Brien from the Jehovah's Witnesses faced some quite intense questioning about this issue, including from the chair of the Royal Commission himself, Justice Peter McClellan, who said that really this puts survivors of child abuse in a terrible position if the organisation itself won't accept that abuse has occurred in the absence of a confession and 2 witnesses. And Mr O'Brien said that it's not a case of the church disbelieving survivors, but went on to say under questioning that scripturally the church cannot accept allegations if the survivor doesn't go to civil authorities, if there is no confession, and in fact if there are not 2 eyewitnesses. So that was really the focus of the evidence about the Jehovah's Witnesses for the morning session.
What else has happened since the last hearing involving the Jehovah's Witness?
It's quite interesting. Since the hearing in 2015, the Royal Commission has received more than 1,000 items of correspondence from people right around the world. We're talking North America, Brazil, Europe, New Zealand, and these are people who are overwhelmingly critical of the Jehovah's Witnesses' institutional response to child sexual abuse, and they're calling for significant changes within the church. We heard that since the last hearing, 17 fresh allegations of child sexual abuse have emerged, and of those, 15 were reported to police. The other 2 were not reported because the adult survivors declined to go to the authorities.
Nicole Shettle in Sydney, thank you.
Sound like, can anyone do this? The answer is yes. We're now going to give you a little experience of a brother by the name of Adrian. This is him on the screen. It all started in March 1993 when Adrian was 14 years of age and a fast-growing tumour was found in his stomach. The doctors wanted to do a biopsy, but they feared that he would have severe bleeding and said that a blood transfusion might be necessary. Adrian at 14 said no, he would not do it. With tears in his eyes, he said, "I just could not live with myself if I was given blood." The doctor asked him, "Do you realise that you could die if you don't take a blood transfusion?" "Yes," Adrian says. "And you're willing to do that?" "If that's what it takes," Adrian responds. His mother, who was present in this conversation, said, "Why are you taking such a stand, Adrian?" This is his reply. "Mum, it's not a good trade. To disobey God and extend my life for a few years now, and then because of my disobedience to God, lose out on a resurrection and living forever in this paradise earth? That's just not smart." Well, he wanted to visit the branch office in Canada, which he did. He got to swim in the swimming pool there with one of his buddies. He went to a game of the Blue Jays baseball team, it was his favourite, and had his picture taken with some of the players. But most important to Adrian, in his heart, he had dedicated his life to serve Jehovah God. But by this time, his condition had worsened, and he was now in hospital and he couldn't leave. So what would he do? How could he be baptised? Well, the nurses kindly arranged for him to use one of the stainless steel tanks in the physiotherapy room. He was baptised there September 12. He died the next day, September 13. Is he the only one of our young ones who stands up for Jehovah? No. The same article that had Adrian's story listed others, such as Lisa Cossack, Crystal Moore, Lene Martinez, Ernestine Gregory. If you wish to look at these beautiful examples of faithful young brothers and sisters, it's the Awake of 1994, May the 22nd. The entire article was dedicated to our young ones. Young ones, you're not alone. Look at everyone around you here. They love you, and they too want to help you to serve Jehovah God. You have a very special privilege, and we'd like to end on this note.
You'll disfellowship.
Yes.
Look at the lady in the background.
And when the person's disfellowshipped, they then can still attend meetings and so on, but under some restriction, is that right?
Mr. Stewart, I'm sure that's his name, this South African attorney, barrister. He is brilliant.
With them socially.
I fully applaud
socially
this
or
man.
spiritually.
Yes. But the person is still otherwise in the world and can associate with people outside of the church.
Yes.
Now this Jehovah Witness guy coming up, tell me if you think you trust him.
How people
Look at
outside
the
of
lady
the
in the
church might be
background.
kept safe from such a person whom you're not satisfied will not reoffend.
She's had enough of these Jehovah Witnesses.
If they were outside the church and they were a close friend, I would tell them.
Would you trust this guy? Look at him.
How would you know if they're a close friend and they're outside of the church?
No, if they were a close friend of mine.
A close friend of yours?
If I was. Yes. If I associated with them.
Well, what about people who are not close friends of yours, others than outside of the church? You don't take any steps, do you, to protect them from this potential reoffending?
Exactly. Look at him. Clueless. Clueless.
You don't do...
Have a go at this
guy. You're concerned with the congregation principally,
Yeah,
aren't you?
we're concerned with the congregations. We are shepherds of the congregation.
Yes, and you're not a shepherd to those who are not in the congregation.
No.
Look at the lady in the background.
As an organisation, in your experience, you don't seek to protect or take care of children who are outside of the congregation.
Oh. This guy couldn't
That's
care
a broad
less. Look at him.
statement.
Well, I can limit
He hasn't got an answer.
In your decision on whether or not to disfellowship someone, you don't take consideration of children outside of the congregation.
Do take consideration of them, but what ability have we got to protect every child in Australia?
Well, what you can do is you can report to the child protection authorities.
And that is done in some cases.
But generally it's not done, is it?
No.
It's not done unless there's a legal requirement for it to be done, is there?
That is true.
What What you can do is you can report to the child protection authorities.
And that is done in some cases.
But generally it's not done, is it?
No.
It's not done unless there's a legal requirement for it to be done, is there?
That is true.
What you can do is you can report to the child protection authorities.
And that is done in some cases.
But generally it's not done, is it?
No.
It's not done unless there's a legal requirement for it to be done, is there?
That is true.
Well, what you can do is you can report to the child protection authorities.
And that is done in some cases.
But generally it's not done, is it?
No.
It's not done unless there's a legal requirement for it to be done, is there?
That is true.
First, the 7-year-old boy facing death because his parents' religious beliefs prohibit blood transfusions. The couple, devout Jehovah's Witnesses, acknowledge their son needs a liver transplant but refuse to consent to him receiving blood. As Jenna Hudson reports, they're headed to the Supreme Court.
We understand this is very stressing for you, but how can you deny your son the treatment he needs to survive?
We are talking about the difference between potentially a child dying or surviving.
You could give him the consent to have this blood transfusion. Why won't you? Why can't you?
Parents around the country are right now shocked and angry at the heartbreaking determination of this mum and dad. Their 7-year-old son has a genetic disease that's shutting down his liver, and he will die unless he has a liver transplant. Problem is, mum and dad are devout Jehovah's Witnesses, and they're refusing to give consent to one vital part of the surgery their son so desperately needs.
Is that the risk that you're willing to take?
The blood transfusion their little boy will most certainly need during the operation is completely against their religious beliefs.
For Jehovah's Witnesses, there are essentially no exceptions for the acceptance of blood transfusions.
How can you deny your son, though, of a blood transfusion he so desperately needs?
Please leave me alone.
The Children's Health Queensland Hospital is taking the parents to the Supreme Court in a fight for the little boy's life. In these documents, it states the parents are aware their child will die within 2 years without this treatment. But on the consent form, the father has crossed out the words blood transfusion.
I don't believe that the argument that you can have a transplant without a transfusion is logical, because you still have some residual blood from the donor in the transplanted organ.
Dr. Ross Walker is one of the only Australian medical practitioners who is willing to talk on camera about this sensitive topic.
When we're talking about the life of a child, I think people's own religious beliefs have to stand aside.
This is the little boy's paediatric gastroenterologist. In court documents, she shares her deepest concerns.
Death is an inevitable consequence of liver failure unless a liver transplant is performed. In a small patient, even a relatively small amount of blood can be significant.
All doctors involved in this controversial and delicate case cannot be interviewed because this medical tug-of-war is still before the Supreme Court.
You can't have the transplant without the transfusion in the vast majority of cases.
A doctor in the court affidavit also states if the boy has the liver transplant with the blood transfusion soon, he has a 90% chance of surviving for another 5 years and a 72% chance of living for more than 25 years. Doctors also say the sicker the little boy gets, the harder it is to carry out the liver transplant at all.
These are very intricate operations, and there's quite a deal of blood loss that goes with the operation.
Jehovah's Witnesses believe the Bible commands they must not ingest blood. They say blood represents life and only God is the giver of life. We're told what these parents are fearing is that their child will be polluted, both spiritually and morally.
Really not accepting blood transfusions, perhaps even in a situation where it might be a case of life and death, is essentially considered a small price to pay for eternal life.
University of Queensland Dr. Tom Eckner is a lecturer in history of religious thought.
And so these decisions about whether a child will live and die, perhaps regarding accepting a blood transfusion or not accepting, must be viewed in terms of what God would want for that child.
In the eyes of a Jehovah's Witness, how would they view this case?
I think that Jehovah's Witnesses would see this is the government impinging upon very central and foundational beliefs that they have, that they've based their lives upon.
Look, we just wanted to find out, how is your son feeling today?
The boy's parents aren't willing to defend their decision, which could ultimately kill their son.
He could die without a blood transfusion. Is that the risk that you're willing to take?
It's my opinion that religion should have no role in the operating theatre. We're talking about life and death situations as opposed to someone's personal philosophy, especially when you're inflicting that personal philosophy on your child.
Are you willing to sacrifice his life for your religion? Is that what it is?
I said leave me alone.
There are many controversial cases relating to Jehovah's Witness children and blood transfusions. In Sydney this year, a pregnant Jehovah's Witness and her baby tragically died after the woman refused a blood transfusion. Also in New South Wales in 2013, the Supreme Court overruled the wishes of a 17-year-old Jehovah's Witness suffering from a lethal form of blood cancer. In London last year, a High Court judge ruled that the son of 2 devout Jehovah's Witnesses can be given blood. And in Dublin in 2008, a High Court judge said a 4-year-old girl could undergo a life-saving blood transfusion, despite her parents' objections.
I don't believe that Jehovah's Witnesses are irrational people. I don't believe that we can just simply label them as good or bad. It's not that black and white.
And I think in that situation, we've got to do what's best for the child.
Is your religion more important to you than your son's life?
And a directions hearing on that case is expected to take place later this month. We will let you know the outcome.